Right, let's get started. Okay, so over the last few years, the V&A has staged a number of exhibitions about well-known personalities and the need to find and create suitable mannequins for real people such as David Bowie and Frida Kahlo has taken us on some very interesting journeys. Although I love banging on about these exhibitions, I thought I'd take this opportunity to look at a less high-profile mannequin conundrum that I came across when working on a recent exhibition called Fashioned from Nature. The issue was this, and I'm sure it's a familiar one for many: how to create animated figures for multiple historic garments on a small budget. Fashion from Nature was staged at the V&A in 2018. As the title suggests, the exhibition explored the complex relationship between fashion and nature through the ages. This meant that a mix of objects from different periods were to be shown. The list included around 90 outfits spanning 5 centuries, the oldest from the 1600s and the newest from the present day. The curator's display vision was to bring the costumes to life by mounting them on full fiberglass mannequins. Stylized heads were chosen with blown back features and moulded hair. This got around the problem of covering bald heads without the need for wigs, which the curator was also keen to avoid. For the contemporary dress, this was fairly straightforward. There are many off-the-shelf mannequins to choose from with blown back features and moulded hair, and as long as you aren't doing an Alexander McQueen exhibition, they can usually be adapted to fit most modern garments. Unfortunately, the same cannot be said for historical dress. Tiny sizes and corseted shapes means that finding anything off the shelf can be tricky. Add in arms, heads, and a moulded hairstyle, and you're asking for a mannequin miracle. It's for this reason that we tend to use simple papier-mâché bust forms at the V&A for historical dress. These basic torsos have the advantage of being cheap and coming in small sizes. They provide a sturdy foundation which can be adapted with padding to the right size and shape to fit individual garments. The figures can then be covered in a top layer of fabric, hiding the padding from view and giving a professional display finish. As purchasing expensive custom-made figures was out of the question, it soon became clear that using a bust form was our only option. The challenge was transforming these headless tailor's dummies into animated figures that could hold their own against the modern mannequins in the show. The curator wanted to avoid the kind of contrast that you can see in this slide and was determined to give the historic dress the same treatment as the contemporary fashion. Fortunately, most suppliers also offer some head and arm options for bust forms. Fabric-covered heads and articulated arms are commonly used in museums, and they seemed the obvious choice for us. Our challenge lay in how to achieve a subtly moulded hairdo. In order to conceal unsightly padding, it was essential for us to use a torso with a fabric finish. But what about the head? Covering moulded hair in material would be very difficult and time-consuming, and it probably wouldn't look that great either. In the end, we solved the problem with papier-mâché. This is what we did. So first of all, we bought a cheap raw papier-mâché bust form, lots of them, and had them covered in a final layer of exhibition paper, and we used this as our display finish. Next, we added adolescent-sized articulated arms to each torso. These are smaller than contemporary sizes and a good fit for historic garments. We then commissioned the mannequin company to make a new head mould with stylized hair. Although the mould itself was pricey, once it had been made, the heads could be churned out very cheaply. These too were finished in a final layer of exhibition paper, and care was taken to follow the natural contours of the hair, which added to the visual effect. It was now down to us to do the rest. The process of making underpinnings, padding up the figure, and covering it in a layer of stretched jersey was carried out as normal. But once this work had been completed, there was one final step. Any jersey visible above the neckline of the costume had to be coated with papier-mâché so that the surface of the torso matched the head. To do this, we marked the neckline of the garment onto the figure and stitched a band of bias tape beneath. This acted as a binding to the papered area and helped prevent it from cockling as it dried. The paper was torn into bits and applied on top of the fabric using wheat starch paste as an adhesive. Special care was taken to blend the new layers of paper with the original neck so that there were no obvious joins and the head could be fitted without difficulty. So this solution was perhaps not the fastest method on record, but it helped bring the historical costume in the exhibition to life in a way that our standard headless torsos could not have done. The lack of mannequin choice for period dress continues to be a big problem and is something that needs tackling, but that's a project for another day.
We have a question for Lara Flecker, which is, can you share your brand and source of exhibition paper?
Well, to be honest, I would have to look that up. In the case of the Fashion from Nature exhibition, we used a recycled paper that was actually used within the design of the exhibition, and that was how it was selected. So I can't actually remember at this moment where we got it from, but I could certainly look that up. But it wasn't, it wasn't a specific exhibition paper. It was a paper that was chosen by designers to be used within the exhibition, and it was a recycled paper. Obviously, had been chosen for this exhibition because it was all about nature and fashion and recycling and all the rest of it. So, sorry not to be able to answer that a little bit more clearly.
It's nice that it was recycled.
It's nice that it was.
Can you please go through the way the head was blended to the paper mâché torso? What materials did you use? How long did it take to dry? And how long did it take you to adapt one mannequin?
Oh, so the blending was interesting. So what you have to remember is that we bought papier mâché torsos already and a head, which were covered in this exhibition paper. So we had the head and we had the torso. The padding was then sort of all over the body. And what the task we had to do was, because we covered the padding in fabric, it was blending the neck in over the top of the fabric so that you couldn't see any join. And we did that by, I finished the fabric with a very tight band of bias binding to make it as flat to the neck as possible, and then covered the layers of paper over the top. I hope that kind of makes sense. The paper, I mean, papier mâché, basically, it's not a fast drying thing, and I tended to do it last thing in the day and would leave it to dry overnight before putting a second layer on. And I was putting sort of 2, sometimes 3 layers over the top to make a good sound, solid finish to the whole thing. And how long did it take me to adapt and pad up, presumably one mannequin? I mean, it does depend terribly on the extremeness of the shape and the size of the figure that you start off with. It could take anything, the resculpting of the body itself could take anything from, I don't know, a day to 3 or 4 days even. But then when you add on underpinnings, particularly something as extreme as that sort of very large pannier frame that I had to make, that's obviously additional time on top. And also if you're making replicas and things, that's also extra time. So it's not a historical costume doesn't tend to be a speedy process, a speedy costume to mount, but and then when you add in the layers of paper that you had to add in as well, it wasn't fast. But yeah, I hope that kind of answers the question.
I think it does.